All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. I'm Liz Ripley hosting today's webinar. We're pleased to have with us Jenny Seifert from University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension. She's a watershed outreach specialist there, and she's going to be sharing with us 2 online communities that are facilitating peer learning about conservation. And so I know Iowa Learning Farms appreciates the love that we get through one of these programs. So let's dive right in and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Liz, and hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As Liz said, I am Jenny Seifert. I am a watershed outreach specialist with UW-Madison Division of Extension. And my work actually, I work multi-state, so I'm not working just in Wisconsin. I work across the Great Lakes and Mississippi River basins. And my programming is really about supporting sort of the on-the-ground folks who are doing soil and water conservation. So it's about capacity building, leadership development, behavior change. Those are some keywords of the work that I do, and supporting folks like conservation professionals and farmers and landowners. And so today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of communities of practice, if you will, that I cultivate through my work, and it's really about facilitating peer learning about conservation. And whether or not you might identify with one of these communities, what I hope that you'll sort of get from this presentation is really some ideas. Sort of why peer learning is a promising mechanism for sort of enhancing conservation, as well as sort of ideas for how you can facilitate peer learning, especially in an online environment. Before I dive into the actual communities that I want to talk about, I'm going to get into a little bit of the logic behind peer learning and why it is important for conservation. And I'm looking at this from a lens of communications and outreach. That's my sort of training and background. So that's the lens that I use when I think about this type of stuff. So first of all, peer learning, what is it? It's a form of collaborative learning. And then what is collaborative learning? That is an approach to teaching and learning that involves groups of people working together to learn something, solve a problem together, complete a task together, and create a product. Collaborative learning, sometimes called side-by-side learning, it can sort of stand in contrast with more individualistic or top-down forms of learning, sort of more traditional types of instruction, if you will. And really sort of collaborative learning or peer learning occurs through conversation, through exchanging resources, and through shared projects. And sort of peer learning really implies this idea of having a shared identity among the learners, and the learners being of equal status, and there being mutual benefit to learning together. And why peer learning can be so important, especially for conservation, is that studies are showing that peer-to-peer communication really is considered the gold standard in behavior change science. And this is particularly true when it comes to behaviors that are complex. And since conservation is one of those complex behaviors, it is really critical to have really a diversity of sources of information and inspiration. And peer networks in that sense can be funnels for those sources of information and really nodes for sharing those sources of information and inspiration. I just want to make sure I didn't skip a slide. I think I'm good. So one of the things about peer learning is that it taps social norms and networks. And some of you might be familiar with the diagram that you see here. This is sort of a diagram of a theory called the diffusion of innovations by Everett Rogers. It really is a theory for how behaviors are adopted within social networks and society. And according to Rogers, learning via social networks really helps reduce uncertainty. It provides support for the adoption of new behaviors, and it helps to normalize practices. So in other words, the social norms act as a fuel that diffuses a new behavior through the adoption curve. And so this is sort of another reason why peer learning can be so powerful, is it helps to sort of diffuse that behavior through the curve. Another thing sort of along those lines is that peer learning helps leverage key information flows. And these are findings, what the bullet points you see here are findings from a study that is looking with a literature review on how behavior spread through social networks, applying it to the context of conservation. And some of the findings from that study include things like, interpersonal communication between peers. It was shown to be the primary channel for the flow of information. It showed that, most people do require social influence to adopt behaviors. The structure of a social group matters. In other words, the stronger the connection, the stronger the influence, which is maybe no surprise. And that, bottom line, peer learning is a channel for complex behavior changes and knowledge co-production. And that study, if you're interested in it, is called Improving Environmental Interventions by Understanding Information Flows by DeLange et al. Another aspect of peer learning and why it's so important is that it may enhance what's called self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is really the perception, one's perception of the ease or difficulty of performing a behavior. In other words, it's the feeling of I can do this and I will have success at doing it. And peer learning can help enhance that. So there's a few sort of behavior change theories where self-efficacy shows up. So in Bandura's social learning theory, it sort of shows that people learn complex social behaviors primarily through observing other people, and that peer learning strengthens that belief in one's own ability to perform a behavior because they see their peers doing it. So again, if you see your peers doing it, it enhances your own belief that you can potentially do it as well. And so according to the theory of planned behavior, which is another big behavior change theory, self-efficacy is a necessary step to empowerment, which is a necessary step to eventual behavior change. And I think my final slide about the science of peer learning is that peer learning really helps tap the story of self. And this is these are findings from another study that I was actually looking at the effects of sort of peer testimonials versus instructor testimonials on students' motivations to achieve in a course. And what that study found was that students were more motivated to achieve in a course when it was their peers saying why it was important versus their instructors. And sort of the conclusion from that was that peer learning taps into the identification process, so the story of self, sort of who we are, as well as subjective norms. And subjective norms, if you're unfamiliar with that term, is really our perceptions of what is expected up by our peers. So what we think our peers think we should do, if you want to say it that way. And I think this quote from the co-author of that study is helpful, is that when I hear a peer story, it connects to the story I am telling myself about who I want to be in the future. All right, so that's a little bit of a quick overview of some of the science behind peer learning. And now I'm going to dive into the two online communities that are facilitating peer learning. And here's just a nutshell glance at these communities. One is called One Good Idea, and the other is called the Confluence for Watershed Leaders. They both have an overarching goal of empowering people to improve water quality, but they go at it from slightly different angles. And so One Good Idea, the target audience for that, or the peers that we're trying to facilitate learning with, are farmers in the movable middle, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. The goal for One Good Idea is really to encourage conservation practice adoption. One Good Idea does this through asynchronous peer learning, so that means learning from others, but not at the same time. So I'm kind of on-demand peer learning, if you will. And there's the link to One Good Idea if you want to look at it while I'm talking. And then the Confluence for Watershed Leaders, our target audience, includes watershed professionals. That includes basically conservation professionals who are working at a watershed scale to improve soil and water resources, as well as engaged farmers and landowners who are engaged in watershed work. The goal of that community is really about building a community of practice and really helping these professionals and leaders with their on-the-ground success. And that has the Confluence has both asynchronous and synchronous peer learning, and I'll tell you what I mean later. And then the website for the Confluence is watershedleaders.org if you want to check it out while I'm talking. All right, first I'm going to get into One Good Idea. And if you're not already familiar with One Good Idea is it's a clearinghouse of videos and podcasts that feature farmers sharing their experiences with conservation practices. And this is the community that Liz referenced earlier, that we have quite a number of content from Iowa Learning Farms in One Good Idea. So basically, One Good Idea is a channel that facilitates farmer-to-farmer learning. It was launched in December 2021, so it's still relatively new. It was a collaboration between extension professionals from several land-grant universities across the Mississippi River Basin, as well as farmers. And I want to emphasize the importance of farmers as co-creators of One Good Idea. They were key partners with us in the creation of it, and as well as in the sustainability of it. We have farmers on our board helping us think about how we can keep One Good Idea relevant and useful to farmers. And just the partners of One Good Idea, if you're interested, the land-grant universities involved include obviously University of Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, Mississippi State University, University of Arkansas, University of Kentucky, and University of Illinois. Those are the original partners on the project, but we are obviously persisting beyond our grant that so we are always open to new partnerships. Our audience for One Good Idea is who I sort of call the movable middle of farmers. And here's our diffusions of innovations curve again. As we are all probably aware, is not all farmers are in the same place on their conservation journeys. And we can all probably agree that we've done a pretty good job at reaching or engaging the farmers who might be the innovators, sort of at the very front end of that curve, and that there's a need sort of reached more towards the middle of the adoption curve. And so that is who we are trying to reach through One Good Idea. We're aiming for these early adopters and the early majority. These are the folks who are probably contemplating conservation. If they're not already doing it, they're sort of actively seeking information about conservation. Maybe they see a neighbor who is having some success with cover crops and are interested in how they can do it on their own operation. Maybe there's some erosion happening in one of their fields and are looking for ways to solve that problem. So it's folks who are contemplating conservation, but maybe not already doing it. And what we know about folks in the early middle is that they really want to know what to do. They want proof that a practice will make a difference. This is really why sort of peer learning is so important, is they can see from their peers who have been there and done that, what's kind of success that they had. Also key to know about early adopters especially is that they're really an important win for a new practice. They tend to have a great deal of influence among their peers. They tend to be opinion leaders. People look to them for what to do, even if they're not the ones pushing the envelope like the innovators. And meanwhile, the early majority tend to be the followers of those early adopters. And they especially want that practical information and proof of how a practice will make a difference. So really, if we can help enough of the middle, with the movable middle make changes, we can maybe reach that tipping point that's going to help make conservation become more mainstream. And I really like to tell the origin of One Good Idea's name, because I think it helps tell the story of what One Good Idea is trying to do. And so way back before the pandemic happened, we had a field day down in Mississippi, and our host was Andy Schmidt, who's the gentleman in the middle here. And during the Q&A, and he was sort of sharing, he does cover crops and no-till on his farm. And during the Q&A at the end, somebody asked him, I go to all these field days and conferences and meetings, and I get overwhelmed by information. How do you know what to try in your operation? And his response is, well, you just have to find that one good idea. And that really turned on a light bulb for us. And so when we were thinking about what can we create that is going to add value to the landscape of farmer-to-farmer learning, this is what we landed on, is trying to create this clearinghouse where it collects farmers' ideas and experiences with these practices, and where so farmers can sort of find ideas that may work on their operation and give them ideas that can help empower them to try something new. And so that is where that came from. And so what you should know about what you find on One Good Idea is we have 3 key criteria for all of our content. And again, our content consists of videos, podcasts, and we also have virtual event recordings. So we have this sort of unofficial tagline, by farmers, for farmers, and backed by evidence. This sort of encapsulates 2 of our key criteria. One, again, all of the content is featuring farmers sharing their experiences. Many of that content also features non-farmer experts, but the key is that there's always a farmer featured sharing what they've done on their operation. Backed by evidence, obviously, this came out of extension, and so we care about evidence-based information. And also we know that farmers want information they can trust, and that we want to sort of combat misinformation that might be out there. And so we do vet all of our content to make sure it is evidence-based. And to us, evidence includes both research as well as a farmer's real-life experience, because we know there's multiple ways of knowing. And we do have a content review team that vets all of our content to ensure that it does sort of meet this criteria. And that team consists of both extension professionals with expertise in conservation, as well as farmers with experience in conservation. And then the third piece of criteria about our content is that it is practical in nature. Again, we know the movable middle, they want to know what works, what doesn't work, so they want to know the how of conservation. And so I wouldn't say that these videos and podcasts are instructionals, play-by-plays about how you should do things, but they're more of a starting place, providing some practical information that can get a farmer going. Yeah, so that's all I want to say about that. And the other thing to know, if you haven't caught on to this already, is that all of our content is crowdsourced. So we knew at the beginning of this that there were a number of organizations and individuals out there already producing quality content. And we just wanted to create a centralized place for that content to help farmers access it more easily, to help them avoid getting lost on an internet rabbit hole, for example, and they can just find it all in one place and know it's vetted information. And so the kinds of sources for this content include farmers directly. There are a number of farmers who have their own YouTube channels and they do conservation and they have videos about their conservation practices. Also, Extension's a big contributor to One Good Idea, and then other organizations who work directly with farmers, such as nonprofits, NRCS, commodity groups, et cetera. And because we crowdsource our content, we're really in a state of constant growth. We currently have over 400 videos and podcasts in the clearinghouse, and hopefully more into the coming months. The content is multi-state. Again, most of it is currently focused on the Mississippi River Basin states, and that's sort of because of the nature of the original grant that supported this was focused on the Mississippi River Basin, but we're not exclusive to other states, and so we're looking to expand into other areas of the country. And if you're interested in learning more about how to contribute content, if you create content in partnership with farmers, the link for more information is there on that slide. And so if we're thinking about One Good Idea in terms of how it can support farmer engagement and farmer to farmer learning, it's really a tool to share with them, to give them ideas for how other farmers are doing conservation on their operations and how they might apply that to their own operation. And then it's also a platform really for amplifying the experiences of farmers and demonstrating the solutions they are doing. With the hope that One Good Idea can help other farmers see that other farmers are doing these practices and sort of they have these authentic stories about what they're doing on their operation, and that can really motivate more farmers to adopt these practices. And I just wanted to share sort of an example of the type of content you'll see. And this was really kind of, I call this one of our home run videos. And so this was a kind of a unique where this farmer, his name is Matt Burkholder. He's based in Ohio. He was one of our first farmers to submit his own do-it-yourself DIY video to us. And we posted it back in December. And he really nailed it out of the park. It's since posting it in December, it has nearly 42,000 views, and we were pretty amazed by the kind of response that I got. And what we think that this exemplifies and sort of experiences farmers are looking for is Matt provides a really authentic voice and authentic story about what he's doing on his operation. It's very simple. We kind of hope that his video kind of inspires other farmers to do something similarly. It's literally him talking to his phone. It's nothing fancy, so it doesn't have to be a fancy video to be successful and to have use to audiences. And we also, I think another thing that it exemplifies is sort of the importance of sort of how you frame your information. And so he was really talking about his sort of how he solved a problem with his heavy clay soils. And he kind of actually I had a conversation with him recently and mentioned how he thinks that our sort of mention of heavy clay soils is really what keyed a lot of people to watch the video because of the sort of the challenges of farming in that kind of soil. And so folks are really interested in learning about that. And so I just think that his videos was a home run example of sort of how simple it can be for a farmer to share their experience with other farmers and people can get value from it. So if you are interested in contributing videos or podcasts, if you are a farmer yourself or a landowner or you work with farmers directly, definitely invite you to consider submitting content. This, again, to run through our key criteria, a farmer must be featured in the video or podcast. The content must be evidence-based, whether that's research or on-farm experiences. Again, practical in nature, talking about what was done and what was learned, the failures and successes. And just as Matt's video exemplifies, really it's important. What's important is the quality of the information that you're providing rather than the production quality, meaning you don't need a fancy camera and all the equipment to make a really good video that's going to be useful to other farmers. And there's a couple of links there if you're interested. Our content criteria link is there. And then also if you're a farmer, we have some tips for creating a video. And then one last thing I want to say about One Good Idea is we also share farmers' ideas for them on social media. We know that farmers tend to be a humble bunch and they don't want to be sharing their own ideas on their own channels. And so we welcome farmers to send us their experiences and their photos of what they're doing, and we can share them for them. And here's some photos of a farmer in New York who was doing some frost seeding, and he was wanting us to share what he was doing. And so I invite you to engage with One Good Idea. You can do it a number of ways. First, we have an email list where we send bi-weekly emails, so every other week, and that's just a small collection of the videos and podcasts that are in the clearinghouse. I'll put that subscribe link in the chat for everyone to make it easy for you. You could also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I definitely encourage you to share One Good Idea with farmers and colleagues if that's relevant for you, and also to consider, again, contributing content to it. Again, we take videos, podcasts, and virtual event recordings. All right, I'm going to next dive into the Confluence for Watershed Leaders. So again, the Confluence for Watershed Leaders, the audience for the Confluence is watershed professionals and engaged farmers and landowners who are part of the effort to improve watersheds. And, you know, in sort of the impetus for the Confluence for Watershed Leaders was that we heard from watershed professionals that they are eager to connect with their peers. They often feel isolated in their roles. They don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want to learn what works and doesn't work. And so the Confluence for Watershed Leaders was an attempt to answer these challenges that watershed professionals were experiencing, as well as farmers to some extent. You know, I think there are many farmers who are doing conservation and really active in this work, and they also feel isolated in what they're doing. They feel like the black sheep in their community. So it's really an attempt to sort of help connect these watershed leaders. And the Confluence is, you know, we call ourselves a community and collaborative of people working for healthy watersheds. You know, we primarily are we're trying to facilitate peer learning among watershed leaders, and you know, we're growing into sort of doing some professional development for watershed professionals and farmers. And the Confluence is another collaborative. So it's a collaborative of land-grant universities, nonprofits, and federal agencies with the common interest in how we can support the on-the-ground folks who are improving or working to improve our watersheds. And one of the sort of the why behind the Confluence is that is this sort of recognized need that we need to build human capital for watershed management. And what do I mean by human capital? That is sort of the skilled and trained personnel in leadership or management roles that are crucial to effective implementation of any initiative. So basically, skilled people who are able to have success on the ground. And kind of some of the mantra behind the Confluence is that we need to be investing more in people. You know, we are doing a great job at investing in research and in practices, but if we're going to really have success with water quality goals, we need to be investing more in people. And so the Confluence is really about amplifying that need to invest in people, as well as sort of building that human capital through peer learning and professional development and network building. I could do a whole separate presentation about this need to invest in people, but that is not what I'm talking about today. And one of the things that I want to add to sort of this definition of human capital is it's not just about the skills, but it's also about the network. So again, the Confluence is about building those networks. And I definitely encourage you to check out the report that I cited here, which is the Successful Watershed Management in the Midwest, Getting to Scale. It sort of identifies human capital among 4 critical elements for successful watershed management. So the Confluence for Watershed Leaders facilitates peer learning in 2 separate ways currently. One of them, so our sort of asynchronous way of learning, again, are sort of, you know, you're not necessarily learning at the same time, but you're learning together still, is our online platform. So we have it's kind of like a social media platform, except it's, you know, without the ads and creepy algorithms, and it's really focused on sort of watersheds and sort of conversation and networking around watersheds and conservation. And then if you're curious about the platform that we use a platform called Mighty Networks. And this platform is really about building a community of practice among watershed leaders. It helps to answer the needs that we heard of watershed leaders wanting to connect and learn from each other. And we're really trying to harness the good of online networks. We know that there's, you know, a lot we can say that we don't like about social media, but, you know, there is some good about it. And so we're trying to harness that good, and especially to bring together an otherwise dispersed community of practice. And to date, we have 436 members on the platform. And if you identify as a watershed leader, I definitely invite you to join the platform. And some of the things that you can do on the platform, you know, include things like, sorry, my cursor is not advancing, is, you can find other watershed professionals and farmers near you, so you can make new connections. It allows you to sort of learn about upcoming events. We have an events listing or events calendar, if you will, that are, relevant to watershed work. People post opportunities, whether it's a job opportunity, a training opportunity, or a funding opportunity. And then it's also a place to get advice. So there's a chat feature, and there's other ways you can sort of ask for advice from your peers. And this sort of just shows an example of a conversation that was had for somebody seeking advice on something. And so I think it's really just a way to sort of, again, to help connect people from different geographic locations. And then the other peer learning method that we're using for the Confluence is called Life Hacks Over Lunch, and that it is a virtual meetup series for watershed professionals. And this is our synchronous virtual meetup series. So again, people are coming together at the same time to learn together is what that means. And Life Hacks is not your typical webinar or virtual learning event. We took a page from the computer programming world that they do what's called a hackathon. Perhaps you've heard of that. And a hackathon essentially is, a computer programmer comes to a group of other computer programmers and has a coding problem, and they all work together to try to solve that coding problem. And so we just adapted that for watershed work. And so a watershed professional will come to the group with a challenge that they're experiencing in their watershed work. And then the conversation is really about what can we do to address that challenge. So the focus of Life Hacks is really on conversation. It's not a presentation, it's all about conversation. And then one of the things that we're really trying to do, we created Life Hacks during the sort of height of the pandemic, and we heard a lot that people kind of miss. What they miss about in-person meetings was that sort of those hallway conversations that happen in between sessions. And so we were trying to figure out what could we do to kind of create that kind of hallway conversation atmosphere. And this Life Hacks Over Lunch was our attempt to do that. So we do Life Hacks Over Lunch on a seasonal basis, so in the fall and the spring, and we've had 4 seasons to date. We just finished up our 4th season. And we really draw people from across the middle of the country. Again, our sort of geographic range is Great Lakes, Mississippi River, Red River, and sort of the Missouri Basin to some extent as well. So it really allows people to connect and learn and cross-pollinate across state lines. And what's exciting is that we're actually going to try out this format with farmers to expand the work that we're doing through One Good Idea. So I hope you can stay tuned for that. We will be thinking more about that come summer. And so if you are more interested in the Confluence and this sort of resonates to you as something that you'd like to be a part of, I invite you to join. You can join our online community at that link there. You can join we have an email list. And then if you're interested in learning more about Life Hacks Over Lunch, the link is there for that. So that is all I have, and I will hand it back over to Liz.
Well, thank you so much. If you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide. Again, if you have any questions for Jenny, feel free to submit those to me in the chat. If you attended today and would like to receive a CCA continuing education unit, please email the following information on the screen to Elena Whitaker by 5 p.m. today. And we'll put her email in the chat for you, but it's alenaw@iastate.edu. Again, your name, the name you watched the webinar with, if it's different, and your CCA number so that we can get that information recorded for you so you get your credits. If you want to go ahead, Jenny, and go to the next one. All right. So we also would appreciate if you take the opportunity to complete this voluntary survey to help collect some additional information for our USDA funded programs. If you have already taken the survey for this year, you do not need to repeat it, but you can scan the QR code there on the screen or access the link to that survey via the chat box. I just posted it in there. We'd love to have you complete that survey as well. All right, and one more slide. We hope you can join us next week for Dr. Badarai out of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and he's going to be focusing on cover crops as targeted for nutrient loss benefits in the future. So with that, we will transition over to questions. And the first one that came in, let's see. Have you or others looked at social media online communities like the Facebook group Everything Cover Crops? What do you think are the pros and cons of creating a new platform like a website versus using the existing platform like a social media site?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that I have not personally looked at sort of the influences of a group like Everything Cover Crops. I do think that is a really important source of information for farmers. I know that there are a number of people that are really, I was actually just having a conversation with some of my colleagues here at UW Extension about how can we, measure the impact that social media is having on farmer behavior. I think it's a tricky nut to crack, but I think there's a lot of curiosity about how we can measure that. One good idea, I would say that I think it's sort of it is a bit different than Everything Cover Crops. We were intentionally trying not to reinvent the wheel. We knew Everything Cover Crops existed. We knew it was successful already. We knew other platforms existed. Like I know that there's, now I'm blanking on it, but there's some, I think it's Ag Talk is another platform where there's a lot of peer learning among farmers. And so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And so we felt that one good idea was something different. Again, it's really about centralizing the content, sort of the videos and podcasts that exist that are featuring farmers. So we felt that that was something new that could add to the landscape for farmer to farmer learning. And so, yeah, we were intentional about trying not to replicate what was already being done, especially, where people are doing that successfully. So I don't know, hopefully that answers the question. It's kind of a squishy answer, but that's what I got.
Another person was curious as to how a technical assistant fits into, maybe overlaps with, or integrates with peer learning as a way to maximize delivery of knowledge and provide support on a continuous basis.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And my assumption is that they're thinking about technical assistance, like what a conservation professional or might be providing to a farmer. I do think that that is another form of peer learning, even though they might have different roles. It is still, there's a common interest there and a mutual benefit there. And so I think that technical assistance does play a key role, and especially if you think about, sort of in sort of this line of thinking, there's another concept called social capital, which is really, your sort of networks and your connections within your community. And I think technical assistance is something that can really enhance an individual's social capital by sort of making those connections. And so I think that is really important. And there are studies that show that the better the social capital within a watershed, the more successful watershed projects are. And so I think that's really key. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. But I do think technical assistance is a key component of peer learning, even though sort of if it's if you're talking about a farmer and a conservation professional or ag retailer, whatever you want to say, even though they're different roles, I think that they're still peers in a sense, and they're still playing that important role. And another thing I want to say, and maybe folks have heard this before too, but we do know that there are studies that show that sort of the number one, sort of the greatest indicator of practice adoption are those relationships between farmers and technical service providers. And so I think that's just another sort of example of that, how that peer learning can be so important.
I think there's kind of tied in questions here. So the platform that you're using for your watershed leaders, is that the Mighty Networks?
It is. Yep. It's called Mighty Networks. So it's it's a platform somebody already built it. So we didn't have to build it ourselves. So it's sort of a third-party platform that we just sort of have an account on, if you will.
Okay. And so someone had a specific question about that platform. Are there capabilities that you wished were supported, or are there any gaps that you see in supporting peer learning online?
Yeah, is that like capabilities within Mighty Networks specifically?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is one of the disadvantages of using a third-party platform, is that you're sort of beholden to the features that they have. When we were deciding which platform to use, Mighty Networks did seem like the best one for us. There are others out there, of course. I think that for the most part, it does what we want it to do. They recently made some changes to their interface that I wasn't too happy with, but we couldn't control that. It was just sort of, to me, it made it a little bit less intuitive about how to post things. But so I think that's like one limitation of using it. I think that, right now I'm kind of drawing a blank on sort of, wishes I would have for the platform, but other than sort of lamenting the changes they recently made. But yeah, I would say overall, I mean, if you're interested in looking and sort of using an online platform to sort of cultivate a community of practice or whatever, definitely do some research. There are a number of options out there of varying, price ranges. And so I definitely would encourage you to look into the options and sort of consider what you need and what you can afford, really. What was the other question?
That was the question.
Oh, okay.
So sorry about that.
That's okay.
So this person commented they really like your idea of, or the concept of crowdsourcing problem solving with your watershed hacks. And glad to hear they're expanding to farmers. For the farmer group, will you still use online video platforms, or how do you get people to be interactive instead of just viewing? So maybe two questions there.
Yeah. So yes, the farmer meetup series will also be virtual, and that is because, again, it's sort of a similar thing where we're trying to reach farmers across a broad geographic range, and so it's just not feasible to do it in person. And we know that a kind of maybe a blessing of the pandemic is I think it is making virtual engagement becoming more and more part of the norm. And so I don't think that the worry of whether farmers will engage in a virtual way is there as much anymore. I don't know, Liz, maybe you can agree or disagree with that, but interestingly, they're actually, I haven't read it yet, but I just, some folks out of Iowa State, I believe, actually recently published a study about the impacts of virtual learning versus face-to-face learning among farmers. I haven't read it yet, but it looks like there was sort of, that they sort of had similar results. And so there's no disadvantage or advantage to doing either. Sort of a two-pronged approach is maybe a good thing. So they will be virtual. And I'm forgetting the second part of that question. I'm sorry.
How do you get people to interact then instead of just viewing?
Sure. Yeah. So how do we do that? We provide a couple of ways for folks to interact. So for life hacks specifically, we start as a large group. So we're all talking together in a large group like we are here. And we encourage people to turn their cameras on. We encourage to participate or to help create a conversational tone. So we really are sort of prompting everyone to really participate in the conversation that way. So we have the large group conversation where folks can sort of just chime in with their thoughts. And then we go to breakout groups for a big portion of it as well, so that if folks who are less comfortable talking in the big group, they might or feel more comfortable in a smaller group, and they have an opportunity to sort of network more easily that way. Another thing that we've also, for the small groups, we provide them, obviously there's the sort of main challenge that they're working through, but then we also provide them some supplemental questions to help support their conversation if they're sort of running out of things to talk about. Another thing that we do that we just started doing this season is we do at the very, very beginning, we have a mini 5-minute speed networking segment where we put folks in a room with 2 or 3 other people, in either pairs or trios, and they get to meet other people in the room. And I think having that opportunity to sort of meet the other people who are the boxes on their screens, I think also helps to sort of create those connections that can help create that conversational atmosphere.
And yeah, that Joe article you're referring to was looking at our outreach, looking at face-to-face versus virtual. So I put a link into that.
Clearly I haven't read it yet, so.
That's okay. That's a great plug for it. I put the link if you're curious to that Joe article. It's free to download. You can check it out there. So it looks at virtually the same as a face-to-face and virtual. So yeah. Okay. So another question here. Do you know of any communities of practice for state or other agency staff that support watershed management or collaboratives? Interested in the options to expand state level support for watershed approaches?
Yeah. So I do know that in Minnesota, there is they have their One Watershed, One Plan, I believe that's what they call it, program. I think it's implemented through their, Bowser is the acronym. It's their Bureau of Soil and Water Resources or something like that. Anyways, they have a network of the folks who are the coordinators of those One Watershed, One Plan projects. And they actually are, they actually use our platform, our Confluence platform, for their own sort of private group to sort of develop that community of practice, or as one of the things that they do. I know they do some other things. So I know that in Minnesota, there's some work along those lines. I believe that in Iowa, at least there once was a Facebook group, at least for watershed coordinators. I'm not sure how active that is now, but yeah, those are a couple. I think that's probably the Minnesota example is probably the stronger example that I can offer. And the folks that are part of that are mostly come from state agencies or soil and water conservation districts.
All right, and the last question I have, at least so far, is have you seen farmers or landowners, or maybe others, develop relationships to support each other beyond the online as a result of any web content?
That's a really great question. Well, one example, I don't know, and yeah, I think one example I can give is that, with the One Good Idea project, or with One Good Idea, the project that it was part of a bigger, if you're familiar with the EPA Farmer to Farmer grant program, it was funded through that program. We had farmer advisors for that project, and I think the farmer advisors, we interacted with them virtually. They are part of our One Good Idea board, and I think that they're maybe an example, and I don't know how good of an example this is, but they're an example of farm. So they're geographically dispersed. They're based in Illinois and Wisconsin and Mississippi and Arkansas, and they didn't know. They came together because through this virtual way that we were able to connect them, and I have since been able to sort of keep connecting. They've come to the field days that we've done, the actual in-person field days we've done to this project, and so I think that we sort of were able to sort of through the virtual opportunities we gave them through this project, we were able to sort of connect them in a deeper way than maybe they would have been otherwise. But that's, again, I'd love to hear more examples of sort of how that virtual connection can lead to sort of in-person and longer lasting relationships. And I think that's a really great thing to think about in terms of something to track with some of the stuff, especially with the virtual meetup series that we're going to be doing. So thank you for that idea.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jenny, for joining us today. You can check out this recording and all of our previous recordings on our website, iowalearningfarms.org. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy the beautiful day out there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.